play into the mental model?
Mental chatters and mental models are related. A mental model is a notion you have that this is the way the world works. And you've got dozens of mental models. You've got a mental model for how do I find a person to marry? How do I keep my marriage fresh? How do I bring up my children? How do I find a job? How do I find a good person to fill this slot that I have? You've got dozens of mental models, possibly hundreds of mental models. Some of these models may be in conflict with each other, and you may or may not be aware of the conflict. The problem is not that you have mental models. Mental models are wonderful devices. They help you save time. They help you make sense of unstructured situations. They're great. The problem is not that you have mental models. The problem is you don't recognize that you have mental models. You think this is the way the world works, but this is not the way the world works. This is your model of this is the way the world works. And the more you believe in your model that this is the way the world works, the more evidence you seem to get that this in fact is the way the world works. And very soon you build a silo around yourself that's impossible to break out of. The problem is not that you have mental models. The problem is that you're not aware that you have mental models. And your mental models give rise to mental chatter, and your mental chatter reinforces your mental model. So it's kind of a recursive loop which keeps coming back. And together they strengthen it into your view of the world. I'll give you a business example right now from one of my coaching clients who was dealing with a partner. And actually, he was not dealing with a partner. He was dealing with a partner's widow because the partner died. And while the partner was a good friend, his wife, his widow, definitely is not. And she's making unreasonable demands, and demanding financial compensation and a whole bunch of things. Everybody's all mad at her because she's several times walked back on promises and so on. And when my client started talking with her, I had had a long discussion with him. So he began by not addressing her betrayal of agreements, not addressing her unreasonableness, just talked about his friend, her husband. And, he commiserated with her in terms of, how difficult it must have been, all of a sudden being single and what's impact that's going to have on the children, how you bring it up, and the children's education. And he genuinely had empathy for her. And he painted her as a person who's reasonable and you could actually have a productive conversation and agreement with, despite the fact that his own record indicated no. And funnily enough, they made significant progress on the issues that were dividing them, and there was a spirit of amity that came in. Because in his mind, he no longer had the mental model that this is an unreasonable person who breaks promises and cannot be trusted. And in his mind, he had the model, hey, here is a person who suffered a grievous loss, and she is the widow of someone who used to be a good friend of mine, and I ought to do what I can to help her cope with this difficult situation. Very often in negotiations, you're stuck with people who are unreasonable, demanding, and so on. And the more you see them as unreasonable, demanding, the more, in fact, that model is validated by the universe. But if, on the other hand, you place them in the position of, he's a reasonable human being who's going through some things, and what he's going through, I cannot say. So let me try and understand that. And more often than not, you'll find that you can have a way through that is somewhat acceptable. Whatever you have in your head reflects itself in the universe outside, Alan. That's another of the learnings that I want to. You never see the world as it is. You always see the world as you are.
That's deep.
Yep. Yes, it is.
So how do you go about changing a mental model? You know it's flawed, but you're stuck with it.
The first thing, the most important, and in many cases the most difficult thing, is to recognize that you have mental models and identify the mental models that you have. And sometimes you've been so stuck in a way of thinking that you don't even recognize that something you have is a mental model and not reality. Which is why, if you remember, when you did the alternate reality exercise in my program, you did it in a small group. Because when you do it in a small group and you trust the members of that small group, many of them will instantly perceive a mental model that you have that you didn't even know you had. You've got blind spots in which you can park a tractor trailer, but they're blind spots for you. And somebody else who isn't stuck where you are can easily perceive that you have a mental model and it's not serving you well. And then point it out to you, and then it's your job to identify it, say, oh my God, here it is, explore the dimensions of that, and replace it with a mental model which serves you better.
How many mental models can you change at a time?
Don't try to make overwhelming changes, because that's something I've seen so often. Very often people say, oh my God, there's this problem and that problem, and they try to craft alternate mental models by the boatful and change them. Don't, you'll come a cropper. My advice is, don't even try changing all your mental models. Yeah, you got lots of mental models and they're, flat out wrong, and some of them may not be serving you well, but you can't make wholesale changes, and life's too short to wrestle with that. Pick mental models which are really handicapping you in an area of your life that's really important to you, and never work on more than one at a time.